Beyond any Caleb Williams versus Jayden Daniels matchup potential, the Chicago Bears need to win to prove they're better than their schedule says they are, and Marcus Mariota is preparing to flex the power of we in Washington, D.C. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Bears and Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast. He's Lauren Cox of the Locked On Bears podcast. Both shows part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And our two squads that we cover are facing off in Week 8 in Washington, D.C. Actually, Landover, Maryland, but whatever, in the DMV. So we are here to talk about both sides of this coming matchup. Your daily podcast, again, covering each team. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, in which we are going to talk about the three things each team must do in order to get this win in Week 8. We're going to talk about the Washington Commanders quarterback conflicts, but Lauren Cox is going to kick us off talking about the Bears needing to compete above the fold. We'll explain what that means coming up here in just a second. Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Thank you for coming through for this Crossover Thursday. Every dayers from Locked On Bears and Locked On Commanders. Thank you especially for coming through every single day. Lauren Cox, Chicago Bears are the best last place team in the NFL, according to record. 4-2, but last place in the NFC North. What is going on over there in Chicago? What is the biggest storyline coming into this Week 8 matchup?
Yeah, there's a lot of feeling like they have a lot more to prove. That even at 4-2, and I think exceeding some expectations at this point, they are still fourth in the NFC North. It's maybe the toughest division in football, and people are very quick to say, "Okay, yeah, the Bears are playing well or whatever." But the last three games, their big wins have been against the Rams, Panthers, and Jaguars. Three bad teams, and the Rams have been struggling in particular and injured in particular. So like three particularly unimpressive victories. So what have they really done? Are they really actually any good? And the idea is that the Commanders will be a nice test in terms of a step up in competition. Maybe not Super Bowl level just yet, step up in competition, but a team that as of right now is the number one scoring offense in football. And I think they're 15th in defense overall. Like, it'll be a little bit more of that stepping stone up of like, okay, the Bears have done it against some bad teams. Can they do it against a better Washington Commanders team? But then you take Jayden Daniels out of the mix, and you can already hear the excuses of like, if the Bears win, well, okay, the Commanders without Jayden Daniels, that doesn't really count as a big win either.
No, that's 100% true. I could hear Commanders fans smiling at the idea that there's another NFL franchise, let alone a 4-2 NFL franchise, that's actually looking at this Washington Commanders squad as a measuring stick game in some sorts, right? Not in the total sorts, but sure. I mean, look, the Chicago Bears and Commanders fans and the Washington Commanders are not void of this by themselves, but like you just mentioned, the Chicago Bears have beaten three last place teams in their respective divisions, including two teams that are last place in the AFC and NFC South divisions, which are considered possibly the worst divisions in football. And then the Tennessee Titans, who are the only reason they're not last is because the Jacksonville Jaguars said, no, we're going to take that last place spot. Or maybe it's flipped. I can't remember which one is actually worse, the Titans or the Jaguars. They're both very bad teams. And then the Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, actually in the upper half of that AFC South division. Those are where the losses come in. So you get that. But the Washington Commanders are kind of in a similar situation where they've beaten the Cincinnati Bengals, who certainly have not lived up to their preseason hype. The Arizona Cardinals, who are not doing great in the NFC West. The Carolina Panthers, just this last weekend, right? The gift that keeps on giving to everybody not named Dave Canales or David Tepper. So, the Washington Commanders fans are hearing a little bit of the same type of conversations. Certainly would like to keep beating teams that you're quote unquote supposed to beat if you are one of these up and coming teams. And the Chicago Bears would be one of those. So make no mistake about it. Jayden Daniels or no Jayden Daniels, I think both sides have their reasons other than just getting a tick in the win column to win this game or to want to win this game. But beyond that, Lauren, what's going on with Chicago Bears as a secondary storyline for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, along the same line of being tested, right? Even without Jayden Daniels, just like Cliff Kingsbury as an offensive coordinator coming against this Bears defense. Like, the Bears defense has played very, very well this season. They're, I think, top 5 in most major statistical categories. But again, like, relatively bad offenses. Even the game they lost, like, to the Indianapolis Colts, they haven't necessarily been lighting the world on fire offensively. And the Texans have had, like, we think of the Texans as a good team, but like, it's not like CJ Stroud is lighting things up exactly overall this season. Like he's had some slower games, even as they are 5-2. So it's like, is Cliff Kingsbury going to find some weaknesses in this Bears defense? And really, like with the Bears coming out of the bye week, it's about how they're going to change their tendencies and try and break from some of the things they've done over the course of the season so far. I think generally Matt Eberflus has done a pretty good job of that, especially this last week against the Jaguars in London, or their last game against the Jaguars in London. We saw him really switch things up more than we had seen him do through the course of the season. And I'm curious, now that they've had an extra week to prepare for Washington and knowing that, Cliff Kingsbury is going to go to some up-tempo stuff and attack your defense in some very specific ways, how well the Bears are able to prepare for that and adjust to that with time coming out of the bye week, or will they just sit on it and say, hey, what we've been doing so far this season is working, and somebody's got to beat us first before we're going to change anything, because why, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
That's true. There is something to be said to like kind of come in there and say, this is the way Bears play football. This is the way we're going to play football. And then maybe have a contingency plan in case Bears football isn't working on Sunday afternoon. You're like, maybe we need to break glass on this other plan. Certainly would be wise to do that. Lauren, I can't let you get out of talking about Bears storylines without asking you Montez Sweat. How has Montez Sweat been since joining the Chicago Bears? Obviously got paid a little bit, right? So it can't be all bad. We've heard Montez say a few things about his time in Washington that aren't too flattering. I think everybody kind of understands why he would say those things. But how has Montez been there in Chicago? Are you looking at him as a pillar for the future of the Chicago Bears' success?
Definitely. He is the leader of that defensive line, at least production wise. I think you kind of know from Washington, he's not like the most vocal take charge kind of guy, but the guy that they think of as the cornerstone of that defensive line. 2.5 sacks so far this season feels maybe a little bit underwhelming purely in sack production, but he's gotten a ton of pressures, and his pass rush win rate is even higher this year than it was last year. So I think there's a feeling like maybe he hasn't had the game where he takes over, makes the big strip sack and the big play, the big moment that changes the game, but he's just been a consistent pressure generator that has allowed other guys on the defensive line to be the ones who gets to the quarterback and gets the glory. But it's because Montez Sweat took 2 offensive linemen and created some pressure on the quarterback, and the quarterback stepped up into somebody else who was then able to take advantage of it. So I think there's been no buyer's remorse or anything whatsoever with Sweat, and full speed ahead on him being really the cornerstone of this defensive line for the long-term future.
Yeah, man. And I love to hear that, man. Tez is a good dude. And I can tell you, just from covering him for a couple of seasons before he got traded, after I got on this beat, like everybody in that locker room, from a media standpoint, I'm talking about, basically was like, this dude has leadership qualities. Again, like not the most vocal guy in the world, right? But he does have kind of some of the qualities that guys would want to follow. Naturally, don't need him to stand up and say, hey, follow me. They'll just do it. And just needed to kind of get into an environment where he was really allowed to shine. And I love what you're saying too, because Commanders fans, watch football team fans going all the way back, like one of the big problems that the Washington Commanders pass rush always had was you had too many guys who were looking for the stat themselves versus guys who understood that setting up success for each other makes all of you better. So to hear that Tez is actually part of a system that is not just feeding everybody, but he is a main catalyst of feeding other people, certainly will make Washington fans happy, as long as he doesn't do it in week 8. Because if he does it in week 8, he might not be surprised to find cold water in the showers after the game, but it may not be by accident. Of course, if the Washington Commanders are going to win this game, they may have to do it with their backup veteran journeyman quarterback, Marcus Mariota. How big of an impact is that going to be? I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it's going to be that big of an impact if it happens. I'll tell you why coming up next on this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bears and Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics has a pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Z-Biotics, which is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how you use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Continuing now in today's episode of Locked On Commanders, Locked On Bears crossover Thursday, previewing this Week 8 matchup between Nick Allegretti's hometown team and the Washington Commanders, the current team that he plays for. I only learned that today because DC News Now here in the DMV, they do trivia with a player from the area of the opposing team that's coming up, and Nick Allegretti was getting grilled on all things Chicago. I have no idea if he got any of them right, because I'm not from Chicago and I don't know Chicago history. What I do know is that the NFL for 2 weeks in a row, Lauren, may not get their Jayden Daniels quarterback competition they were hoping for, because last week it was the Carolina Panthers, which from the release of the schedule was a 4:05 p.m. kickoff. And everybody kind of scratched their head and said, why is this a 4:05 p.m. kickoff? But then you look at number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams is on a bye. Dallas Cowboys are on a bye. There's 2 Monday night games. You obviously have your Sunday night game. You have your Thursday night game. So now you're like, well, there's like 8 teams they would like to put in the afternoon slot of this NFL schedule that are unavailable. So Bryce Young versus Jayden Daniels is about the best you're going to get in this situation. The only problem is the Carolina Panthers were a week away from making Bryce Young their starter again, apparently. Now they're hoping that when they flex the Chicago Bears, Washington Bears matchup to 4:25 p.m., that they were going to get Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. And Jayden Daniels may not play. But Lauren, here's the bottom line up front of this whole thing. Dan Quinn has been incredibly conservative when it comes to managing injuries on his player. Johnny Newton, second-round defensive tackle that should have been a first-round defensive tackle if it wasn't for that foot injury, had to have surgery on his other foot shortly after being drafted. That kind of delayed his development, his training camp opportunities. They were uber conservative with that. Jordan McGee, 5th-round linebacker, was a big standout player during training camp, threatening to take, not a starting role because Bobby Wagner is there and that's not going to happen, but a major role in the defense as a day 3 rookie. He suffered a knee injury. Not only did they put him on IR to start the season, they took him all the way to the 21st day of his window to return until before they actually made him active. And there's a possibility where he may not even play. That would be a special teams thing anyway, but more so just to demonstrate that even if Jayden Daniels is medically cleared to play this game with that rib injury, there is a possibility. I would even say there's a likelihood that Dan Quinn is going to say, you know what? 80% Jayden Daniels is not good enough for me in week 8. I'll get 100% Jayden Daniels week 9 against the New York Giants, a divisional matchup. And that is why I think you're more likely to see Marcus Mariota. Washington Commanders fans may not like that. Bears fans maybe sit back saying, okay, that's an easier game. But Marcus Mariota just went 18 for 23, 205 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, led the Washington Commanders to 30 points scored after starting 0-3 for the day. So he went 18 for his last 20. Certainly looked to get into rhythm. And Zach Ertz talked after the game, Lauren, said that Marcus Mariota has never been in a scheme like this one that accentuates what Marcus Mariota does well. And that, I think, is a big part of this. Obviously, the confidence that Marcus Mariota has as well. So that quarterback situation is a little bit murky, but I don't think it's as dire as some people outside of Washington maybe think that it might be.
Sure. Yeah. How do you think the system accentuates both Jayden Daniels and Marcus Mariota in terms of what they do well there? Like, because I think the idea is like, okay, well, if quarterbacks, if the quarterback in this case doesn't matter as much because Mariota is good, then obviously a lot of the credit goes to Cliff Kingsbury and the system. What do you think is making this so successful? Not that any quarterback could plug in there, but so successful for both Daniels and now Mariota.
Well, first things first, Cliff Kingsbury is okay with Marcus Mariota and Jayden Daniels using their legs. And as weird as it is to say that, there are examples of quarterbacks, Chicago Bears might be familiar with some of those examples, where quarterbacks who have this mobile ability and this ability to extend plays are essentially told, don't use your legs. We want you to stand tall in the pocket, trust your protection, go through your progressions, make your reads, throw the ball. That's what you're paid to do. And that's true to a certain extent. But you also have these quarterbacks that have this natural ability, and you have them fighting their natural ability. Marcus Mariota, I don't want to go all the way back through the history of the Tennessee Titans when he was drafted in 2015 and all that stuff. But basically, from talking to Marcus, there are signs there that, one, too much was put on him at a very young age that they're not doing with Jayden here, and that's part of this. 2, the schemes don't necessarily allow you to accentuate all of your best talents. I actually watched here in Washington where Taylor Heineke, who's one of his best talents was his ability to scramble, his ability to get out of the pocket, was literally being told by his offensive coordinator, who ironically recruited him to run his system, don't be an athlete, which doesn't make any sense. No, the other part of this has to be that no-huddle offense. The no-huddle offense is giving defense fits because it doesn't allow you to obviously shift into different personnel, right? You're stuck with the same personnel when the offense is going to no-huddle, but we're also switching formation alignments, personnel alignments, all that stuff, and you're not allowing the defense to have enough time to really communicate what's going on the field. So you might actually present the defense with a scouted look, but because the communication isn't happening, the Bears defense, the Panthers defense, whatever defense it is, isn't getting enough time to actually communicate, hey, here's what we're going to check into because we have this scouted look. And to me, it's actually the most brilliant way to bring a scouted look to an opponent is to say, okay, here's the scouted look. You got about 5 seconds to get set for it, and then we're snapping the ball. And if you can't get set for it, then you're not, I don't want to say you're toast because you're still an NFL defense, but certainly the advantage goes even more to the offense.
How close do you view their rushing abilities? It's hard to believe for me that Marcus Mariota is about to turn 31 years old. That's I was just looking that up. That blows my mind. But like Jayden Daniels has more rushing yards this season than any Chicago Bears running back. And I know Mariota's got mobility and he had a couple of nice scrambles last week, but he can't be at the level of Jayden Daniels. So I don't know how close do you sort of see that? How much of a threat should the Bears defense be concerned with from Mariota, either taking off and running plays, or I know they ran a number of read options with him last week as well.
Yeah, I would say this. If Jayden Daniels' running ability is in Washington, D.C., Marcus Mariota's running ability is in Chicago. That's how far apart they are as runners. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. But Marcus Mariota, he can extend, right? He can extend. If the defense gets caught, in man running away from him and leaves the side of the field open, or if they over pursue and allow him to escape, he can do enough to make you pay for that. That's not going to be his primary weapon, though. What it's going to be is kind of like what you saw on the first touchdown pass he threw against the Carolina Panthers last week, is he's rolling out to the right side of the pocket, staying vertical to the line of scrimmage, or staying horizontal on the line of scrimmage, and allowing his receivers to uncover, finding a guy like Zach Ertz in the back of the end zone. That's really what he's going to be able to do. And the way that these guys practice those scramble drills, the way that they kind of set up these reads and these possibilities, and that's all really what's going to make it happen. So to that aspect, if you're a Chicago Bears fan, if you're Chicago Bears defense, it's a little bit less worrisome, right? You don't have to worry about like the 45-yard run type of thing that could turn into a touchdown if your quarterback makes the right read and cut. But you do still have to worry about the fact that you can't over pursue this guy. So you can't rush past the quarterback. And even if you're in man, you got to have some sort of mechanism to be like, hey, guys, turn the F around and get back after that quarterback because we're losing contain.
The Bears have definitely had a tendency this season to overrush quarterbacks, even when they haven't been particularly aggressively mobile. They've missed a lot of tackles on what probably should be sacks in the backfield. So there's an opportunity where Mariota doesn't have to be lightning quick and rush for 20 yards after the scramble, but he can be just mobile enough to make a guy miss, and he can extend those plays and dash them a little bit if the coverage can't hold up on the back end there. So definitely something that the Bears need to keep an eye on here.
Yeah, man. And look, that's going to be a factor because, one thing that has not changed about Marcus Mariota is he will hold the ball. He will absolutely hold the football. So if you're the Chicago Bears, and look, Commanders fans, don't get mad at me. I'm not telling them anything that Coach Eberflus and that staff doesn't already know. If you can keep him in that pocket and prevent him from escaping, don't overrush the quarterback, all of those things we're talking about, Marcus will hold the ball for not every time, but he will hold the ball on occasion and allow you to potentially get a strip sack, potentially get your hands on that football, create a tip drill scenario, or just straight up get the sack. So that is something that is in Marcus Mariota's history. It's something that we've seen continue through training camp and everything else. And it's something that he will do. But again, the good thing about this offense is they actually kind of design escape opportunities for their quarterbacks, and that I think makes it a little bit less likely to actually happen. And then Lauren, on the defensive side, talk about the Bears defense, Commanders defense, they've been hot and cold, right? Like you have the Arizona Cardinals and you have the Cleveland Browns, and those games, they get like 7, something like that, sacks combined. Carolina Panthers, they get some pressure, they get some sacks, they get some interceptions, everything's hunky-dory, but just kind of like what we just talked about with the Chicago Bears, those are not exactly world-beating offenses right now. Then you see them go up against the Baltimore Ravens, give up a 30 burger, give up a ton of points, go up against Cincinnati Bengals, give up a 30 burger, 30 plus points. The question is the Chicago Bears offense, who is not necessarily ranking in the top of the NFL, but certainly has weapons with Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Cole Kmet. I'll tell Bears fans about those weapons. That is what concerns me, is like this could be not a get right game, but it could be a somewhat of a breakout game when you compare what the Bears might be able to do against this defense versus what they've done against other defenses.
Yeah, I think a lot of the season stats for the Bears are lower because they started really slow offensively, but the last 3 games have been pretty lights out from Williams and company on offense. And that's where, like, again, Washington represents not an elite defense by any means, but a defense that has had some better moments that are going to test the Bears in their own ways. And certainly how they respond against Washington is going to be one of the big keys to this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the odds makers, it might be Jayden. Maybe it's how Caleb Williams has been playing better as the weeks continue to develop. And that, we're going to reference a little bit of his earlier play here on the show later this week. But that Caleb Williams is not necessarily the same Caleb Williams you're going to see this weekend. FanDuel has the Chicago Bears favored in this one. How much they're favored by and what the Chicago Bears must do to secure that win that they're favored to get. Coming up next on this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bears and Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, those crossover Thursday odds are brought to you by FanDuel. And NFL fans, you can get a big return this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, maybe you're watching Caleb Williams and Marcus Mariota battling it out for the Bears and Commanders this afternoon, coming up on Sunday, and you think Bears are down 10, but the game flow tells you that they're going to come back and they're probably going to win this thing by a field goal or more. You can go in, you can get the live stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more information on the exact same site where you can place that bet and predict that Bears comeback win, or vice versa. Maybe it's Commanders comeback win. And if you're new to FanDuel, make that bet a $5 bet. If it's your first one, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, whether the Chicago Bears or Washington Commanders prove you right or wrong. The Commanders are 2.5-point underdogs at home against the Chicago Bears. But that line opened up at 3.5 points. So I think there's a few people taking that line saying, okay, I'll take that bet, FanDuel. And FanDuel maybe is getting a little bit nervous about that. The over-under on that game is 43.5 total points. We're not going to do our final projections here, but I will tell you, I actually think this game is going to come in under that 43.5 point total score. If you want to know why, come back Friday to Locked On Commanders. Either way, take full advantage of this latest opportunity. Go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. This week's crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bears and Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Prize Picks. And now Lauren Cox, Locked On Bears host, and myself, David Harrison of Locked On Commanders, are going to tell you the 3 things that each team must do in order to get a win in Week 8 in Northwest Stadium in Landover, Maryland. Lauren, the away team gets to call the coin toss, so I'm going to let you call your 3 things first.
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, if I look specifically to this Washington game, it's having a plan for the up tempo and the no huddle. Like, the Bears have definitely been a team that prides itself on conditioning and working their guys hard through training camp in the preseason so that they don't run out of gas by the fourth quarter of games. I feel like they can outlast teams to the fourth quarter, but up tempo is a great way to really test that. And I don't think other teams have really tested the Bears in that regard. And sometimes that defensive line can get tired, and they've tried some different rotations in that group up front. So I think the Bears need to have a concrete plan there and to be able to stay a step ahead, and not only just, get off the field on third downs so the Commanders can't get these, up tempo drives going where they get into a rhythm and march their way down the field, but also, find ways to stop the clock by getting ball carriers out of bounds, or, if you can force an incomplete pass so they can't hurry up to the line of scrimmage and get the next play going, so that you can be ready on your substitutions when the clock does stop. Because that's the other aspect of this is, okay, you stop the clock. Now what? Do you have a platoon for the defensive line? How are you going to rotate guys in and out of there so that you're getting a consistent pass rush? And then, how they mix in, blitzes and other things like that to try and disrupt that rhythm of the Commanders' offense is really going to be critical. Because we talked a little bit this week about how the Bears had kind of gotten a little predictable blitzing. It was usually the slot cornerback, usually on second and long, and usually out of single deep coverages. Last week against the Jaguars, they switched that up quite a bit and went more 2 deep coverages, blitzed on different downs, different places. So if they can stay one step ahead with the Commanders there, that's also going to be I sort of meshed in a second key to victory there, is mixing up the pass rush to disrupt the offense, staying ahead of the up tempo. And then I think offensively for the Bears, right, it's about keeping things easy for Caleb Williams. When he struggled early this season, it's because they couldn't run the ball and they weren't on the same page with receivers. And so he had to do a lot. He had to throw the ball 50 plus times against the Indianapolis Colts, and they still lost in that game. But if they can keep the running game going, they've made good progress in that regard. They can, let the checkdowns make plays after the catch. He doesn't have to throw the bombs all the time and make things happen everywhere for the offense. Just take what the defense gives you. Trust that your defense is going to give you an extra opportunity or two with a turnover at some point in this game, and let everything sort of come to Caleb. That's been really the formula for the Bears' success.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I'll tell you, on the Commander side of things, I think, the 3 things you got to do is contain Caleb, maximize turnover worthy plays. And then, of course, because we have to get something on the offensive side of the ball, run the ball. I don't care who the quarterback is. This needs to be a Brian Robinson heavy game if you're the Washington Commanders. And it actually goes right into one of the things you're talking about. So I'm going to start there real quick. Run the ball, keep the clock running, shorten the game, and put more pressure on that Chicago Bears offense to produce on a drive-in, drive-out basis. The Washington Commanders have been really good about producing points on not every drive, right? They did have that really long run earlier in the season where they were producing points or at least scoring opportunities on every drive, but they are still scoring at a very, very impressive clip. They still did it against, again, Carolina Panthers defense got it, but they still did that even with Marcus Mariota in the game last week. Now that he's going to have a full week, and just to be clear, Jayden Daniels not playing is not a for sure thing, but right now we're kind of operating under that belief. That's that, at least most of us here in Washington are operating under that belief. So that's why the conversation is slanted that way. But even if Jayden comes out there and plays, clearly he's still going to have a little bit of a rib owie going on. So you don't want to get him hit as much as possible. And the Chicago Bears, like we just talked about, they're getting a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. Their sack percentage compared to dropbacks that they're facing is really high. Their interception percentage is really solid. The best way to keep a defense from intercepting passes and sacking quarterbacks, give the ball to the running backs. You got three really good ones. Brian Robinson Jr., I think, is nationally underrated and maybe even criminally underrated. Austin Eckler is a very capable veteran. And then Jeremy McNichols has had his moments as well this season and proven that he can be a reliable third running back in the pecking order. I want those three backs, Lauren, this weekend. I don't care who the quarterback is, to combine for 25 or more carries. Then we can talk about Austin Eckler's receptions and maybe B-Rob on a check down or two and all those things. But I want 25 carries. And if you can manage to get a game flow going as the Washington Commanders offense to where you can justify 25 or more combined carries for those three backs, I think you're going to put yourself in a very good situation. Like I said, you're going to shrink the game. And then defensively, maximize on turnover-worthy plays and contain Caleb Williams in the pocket. Caleb Williams is not the runner Jayden Daniels is. I think you don't have to be a draft expert to understand that, but he can certainly still do damage with his legs, whether it's extending plays or getting rushing yards himself. So you want to contain him in there a lot like they did with Kyler Murray, a lot like they tried to do with Lamar Jackson and had success here and there while they were trying to do that and get that pressure. The games where Caleb Williams is doing the best so far this season are just so happen to, not coincidentally, be the games he has the longest average time to throw, which means he's taking his time when he has it available to him. Don't let him have that time. Put pressure on him early. Even if you don't get in on him, make him throw a ball before he wants to throw that pass. Turn that into a turnover-worthy play, of which Caleb has had 3 turnover-worthy plays in one game. He's had at least 1 turnover-worthy play in every single game but one. Lauren, the Washington Commanders defense hasn't done a great job of maximizing on turnover-worthy plays, but they did it last week against Andy Dalton and the Carolina Panthers, getting 1 pick six and then another interception later. Convert that 1 or more turnover-worthy play that Caleb has been throwing right now per game into a takeaway. Extend your own drives. Take away one of Caleb Williams' drives. To me, that's a recipe to getting a win.
I think you're spot on there about Caleb Williams, where it's like, yeah, every game they'll give you one. He's not going to put the ball in. He's not reckless with the ball at all. Like, it's not a pattern of behavior where, he throws 3 balls that could be picked off, but only 1 does. It's just like every game, there's been like one kind of rookie mistake type of stinker where you're like, all right, we can live with that for a rookie quarterback in his rookie season. So you have to be able to take advantage of those. And with the Commanders running game too, like, the Bears defense has been a little bit more vulnerable on the ground than it has been through the air. And there's been a few games this year where they'll just randomly kind of give up a big, not a breakaway, like 60-yard kind of touchdown, but just like a couple of big gashing runs where I think the Commanders will have a drive or two in this game where it feels like, oh, they're in rhythm and everything's rolling, and they'll get a couple touchdowns on those drives. And you'll start to feel like, okay, there's a formula and a path here. It's just a matter of, can they do that for 4 quarters? And typically this Bears defense has been really good at, they'll give up a touchdown drive in the first half and then stand pretty darn strong the rest of it. They'll give up a touchdown drive in the second half and stand pretty darn strong for the rest of it. And then it's a matter of how much the Bears offense can then score to match what this defense allows. But I agree with you that like the under bet feels a little bit more likely here. I don't think this is going to become a full on like shootout in either direction, but I do find myself leaning towards, especially without Jayden Daniels, probably a Bears victory along the lines of where the spread is right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling that way. We will see what's going to happen, of course. But before we get to the game, Lauren Cox and I will each drop at least one more episode on Locked On Commanders and our Locked On Bears perspective channels. So come through. I know for Locked On Commanders fans, I'm going to deep dive the 3 things that this team must do to get a win on our next episode. And I'm sure Lauren Cox, one of the best on this network. And I'm not just saying that because he's here. is going to have a lot of good stuff for Bears fans. So make sure you check out Locked On Commanders, Locked On Bears for your next listen. Check out Locked On NFL. In the morning, you get Madman Tyler rolling with a little bit of NFL espresso. In the afternoon, you roll through the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders or Locked On Bears or Locked On Bears. Maybe listen to both every single day. Make it your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until next Thursday, we will see you again for another crossover episode of Locked On Bears, Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.